Hello chums, and welcome to Taming a Monster, the series where I take some of Gran Turismo 7's most ridiculous cars to see if I can tweak them so that a talentless pleb like me can handle them without being killed to death. Like any common ruffian, I'm using a bog standard PlayStation 5 controller, and I have all driver assists turned off, except for ABS. Let's see what car is trying to murder me today. I'll bet you forgot this engine swap even existed. I know I did. The Lexus LC Coupe is a car known for being utterly stunning, for having one of the most amazing interiors on any car ever, and for being bloody heavy. Should work very well then with a twin-turbo V8 with 1200 horsepower. As usual, all upgrades have been fitted, including power upgrades, weight reduction, wide body and the body rigidity increase. None of the settings have yet been touched, except for downforce, which is maxed, and the transmission, which has already been adjusted to suit this car. I have fitted aftermarket wheels in the smallest size available, which usually makes the car more compliant over curbs and slightly less twitchy in general. The difference is tiny though. I have fitted a front splitter for front downforce, and a custom wing set, which adds more downforce to the rear than the Type A or B wing options. It may not be to your taste, but I highly recommend it if you're running the full 1200 horsepower, especially with racing tyres. If you're interested in learning more about aero, downforce, or any other aspect of tuning your car, I have a series called Tuning for Beginners which covers everything from suspension to differential to the transmission. Inspired by my previous video featuring the Audi R8 W16, I decided to head straight to the Nürburgring to get a starting lap time. This way I can either look really clever when I improve it by 10 seconds, or I can look like a total cock when my finished setup doesn't go any faster. To begin with, I feared that this would be one of those occasions where I am indeed made to look like a cock. The Lexus, like many of the heavier cars I've tested, felt fairly stable to begin with. Thankfully though, I was proven wrong when the car bit me in the arse. Ow. Like many cars on their default settings, the suspension was very soft, so the car leans a lot. In low speed corners this isn't too much of a problem, but at high speeds downforce adds even more load onto the suspension, which basically means that if you slide at high speed, the front wheels are jammed up inside the arches, meaning you can't steer to correct it. This will more often than not result in a life-altering collision. For the rest of the lap, I took it rather gingerly to try and prevent these handling quirks from biting me in the arse, which makes the car look significantly less shit than it actually is. The car also has some fairly obvious understeer at high speeds as well, which can result in its own life-altering collisions. As it was, the Lexus got a 6 minutes 43 second lap to make for a very disappointing first attempt. On the upside, it shouldn't take much to improve on it. Ow. For my first tweaks, I did my usual, which was of course to increase anti-roll bar stiffness and natural frequency in order to reduce body roll and prevent the steering from locking up. I then set up a custom race so that I could earn some dosh while I was setting up the car. The reduction in body roll certainly helped the car behave more, but it was still a fairly unreasonable thing to drive. It really does not handle its 1200 horsepower very well, being extremely quick to oversteer when exiting a corner. This is kind of surprising, because many of the game's heavier cars are typically a lot more stable in this regard, such as the Jaguar F-Type, with the engine from the Jaguar XJR9. Admittedly, one thing that did impress me was the brakes. This is a heavy car with a very high top speed, and yet at no point did I feel like the brakes weren't up to the task of slowing it down. Next up, I finished off the suspension settings. I slightly increased the body height because the car still felt like it was prone to wheel arch rubbing. I also increased compression, which typically makes the car more compliant over bumps. I then decreased negative camber because this can help with straight line traction, and in some cases higher values can actually cause understeer at high speeds. I also added some rear toe in to try and reduce power oversteer. The Lexus felt tidier, but still it was mostly quite unreasonable. Learn to drive, you bloody window lickers. It was still very quick to oversteer when exiting a corner, though the understeer at high speed definitely felt improved. Beyond that, any changes were quite minimal. For my final set of changes, I adjusted the differential. I decreased initial torque and braking sensitivity to make the car more agile. I also decreased acceleration sensitivity to hopefully make the car slightly less likely to oversteer as quickly. Since this car behaves like a muscle car in some cases, I also added a few kilos of ballast weight to the rear axle, which should reduce wheel spin. Adding 29 kilograms, the wheel spin was actually noticeably reduced. Since it was such a small amount of weight to add on, it also didn't negatively affect the brakes. The car is still very quick to slide if you aren't careful with accelerator inputs though. To be fair though, this is a rear-wheel drive car with 1200 horsepower, so it's probably a bit silly to expect much more than that. Either way, it was time to go back to the Nürburgring to see if I could improve on the original 6 minutes 43 lap time. There was a slight mishap on my first attempt. Oh bollocks. I didn't make any further changes, so this was the final setup for the Lexus. This is a car I want to like, but once again, the engine swap lets it down. The LS7 drift car engine does not sound good for a V8, and the turbo lag is unpredictable, and it's generally just not very nice. Still, among the many rear-wheel drive LS7 swaps available, this is one of the better ones. The Volvo 240, for example, is very overpowered in 600 performance point races, but it's a spiteful bastard to drive. The Silvia S13 handles quite well, but the brakes are quite hopeless, and the lack of weight makes for a lot of wheel spin. The 1997 BMW M3 E36 isn't too bad either, though its suspension can be very prone to wheel arch rubbing even with the body height increased by quite a way. Among the rear-wheel drive road cars that can have this engine fitted, I would probably put this second, behind, of all things, the Toyota Hiace van. That van has more downforce, believe it or not. The lack of a rear diffuser option hurts the LC500's overall performance. This kind of straight line speed really needs to be matched up with enough downforce to keep it nailed down, but outside of the Volvo 240, this Lexus has the lowest total downforce of any car with this engine. It can make for a muscle car type experience, where it's all power but needs to slow down more for the corners. After all that though, I would still keep the stock engine in this car. 750 horsepower or so, and no turbo makes for an underdog that's actually very nice to drive. In the end, the Lexus managed a 6 minutes 19, so it's an improvement of 24 seconds, so thankfully I don't look like a cock. It's also a second faster than the S13 Silvia, 8 seconds faster than the Hiace van, and 12 seconds faster than the Volvo 240. Maybe I should finally test the Mitsubishi Evo 8 with this engine. So, that was my attempt to tame a monster. I hope my settings helped, or that you enjoyed this video. Join me next time where I'll probably be driving something lighter. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're feeling particularly generous, I would greatly appreciate your subscription. Take care now, and ta-ra.